No. Good morning to all of you. You are most welcome here. I know some of you have very full bellies, so I'm glad that my husband fed you. But it's lovely, lovely to see you here, and thank you for joining us. We are hoping that more will join us as we go through this day. But I want to welcome Mark. Thank you for coming from Campus Riss. You all know that he, not only is he Heatherlyn and Rob's son, but he's also the founder of, as far as I know, of Johara Treatment Center. And you are going to share with us today kingdom thinking, faith accounting, and so I'm not going to say anything more. We want to hear your faith journey and what God has done in your life. So welcome with us. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. I hope everything's set up. Okay, cool. So today we are talking about faith accounting, which is a topic that's going to upset many of the accountants and business owners sitting in the church hall. So if you've ever done bookkeeping or accounting or been the treasurer of anything, yeah, I'm sorry if this makes you very uncomfortable, but yeah, let's give it a go anyways. So I think I'm kind of bringing it all in. It was a very strange talk to put together because I'm kind of talking about myself, but at the same time I'm like the same as Johara, so I kind of talk a little bit about Johara, and then Johara kind of reflects that of the church and everybody else in the hall. So yeah, if I mix up the presentation of where it's coming from, please forgive me, but I suppose any talk done in a church is actually aimed at the people sitting in the pews. So yeah, let's hope that it touches some points that could make you think a little bit. Okay, John, next slide. I don't know how to, there we go. John's working the slides there. So I think just before we start, I think it's important to know that my journey started here in more ways than one. It really started here because this is where I was brought up, and my ministry started here with the Heal meetings, and then it moved into the halfway house, which was actually a blessing that came through this church as well. So I think that the first real experience of absolute provision for the ministry was really through St.Francis when we were trying to open a halfway house in 2008, I think it might have been. And we were looking for a property, and one of the school teachers at Boys High passed away, and left his house to St. Francis Church, which then happened to just align with what we wanted to do. So the first thing that we did, opening a halfway house, was definitely done through the house that St. Francis used to own, if I'm not mistaken. I think you sold it, just down the road in Menlo Park. And that, for me, was a real big experience in understanding how God provides. I'm a driven guy, and I like to do things my way, and I often like to kick open doors. And when I was still young, I liked to rely on the bank of mom and dad. And so yeah, often the discussions was presenting ideas and things, and then tapping into the bank of mom and dad, which I think most young people do. Hey, thankfully God has limited the tapping into the bank of mom and dad. Not to say that we haven't tapped into the bank of mom and dad, but yeah, we haven't ever gone down the heavy roads of getting mortgages and like lending big money and doing all of those things, because God has literally always just provided at the very right time when we're looking. And I've come to learn, if God's not providing, He doesn't want us there. And I think this is a big concept of this entire talk, is to understand that faith accounting really works off a couple of principles. One of the biggest ones is that God will provide. And so if God's not providing, then you probably don't need to be doing. And God provides, His promises, He provides everything that we are needing for living a godly life. And I think understanding that principle, I'm going to go into it a lot, but understanding that principle in my life is that I have everything I need to live a godly life. If I feel like I need more, I'm either no longer looking to live a godly life and walking out of the godly journey, or I'm in the absolute wrong place and I shouldn't be where I am. And living on a principle of understanding that God will provide for our needs really helps us to get to focus on what the real work at hand is all about. So next slide. I think I'm going to start this talk just to put in there what is the Johara mission. Sorry, go back. The Johara mission, when we started Johara, we really kind of, you generally have a vision and a mission statement in any business planning that you put together. And the mission statement was very clear for me. It just came out of 2 Corinthians 4. And it's something that underpins everything that we do in our life. And I think it's really important to understand that it says, and so since God in all his mercy has given us this wonderful ministry, that we never give up. And that is one of the driving forces, specifically for Johara, specifically in the ministry of recovery and addiction, specifically in working with people's lives, is that we've got to come from a perspective of nothing's going to stop us. We're not going to give up. If this way isn't working, we're finding another way. Whatever we need to do to get to the end of the goal, that's what needs to be done. It goes on and says, we do reject all shameful and underhanded methods. Again, I think that's going to talk into some principles just now. But when we start to talk about godly living and living in that purpose and that calling, we've got to start to live a principled life. One of those principles is that we don't operate in unhanded, shameful methods, which from a super spiritual perspective might seem like really like we definitely don't do that. But when we start to look at business and we start to look at how we operate and function in the world, there is a lot of shameful and underhanded methods that get implemented that are not necessarily aligned with the principles of how we should be living. It says, we do not try to trick anyone, and we do not distort the word of God. We tell the truth before God, and all who are honest know that. We don't go around preaching about ourselves. We preach about Christ Jesus the Lord. All we say about ourselves is that we are your servants because of what Jesus has done for us. For God, who said, let there be light in the darkness, has made us understand that this light is the brightness of the glory of God that is seen in the face of Jesus. And so, that servant-mindedness is what drives everything. We remain servants. I'm not an owner of Johara. Johara is certainly not mine. I'm a servant of God, and God has blessed me with the ability to actually serve within Johara. And that remains a crucial concept in saying there's no ownership here. It's not an ownership thing. My biggest drive and my biggest worry about the future is who's taking over next. And I know that God's going to provide that person, but this is not mine. This is not the Lewis's. This is God's ministry. We're blessed to work in that ministry. And we're only blessed to work in that ministry if we align ourselves and stay in tune with the principles. The minute we get ahead of ourselves and we become arrogant and we become ownership and become driven, and we're going to lose that ministry. And I've seen it happen in the 18, 19 years that we've been doing this. I've seen it happen many, many times where ministries that are functioning well suddenly become about ownership and self-serving. And the minute that happens, God takes it away. That's one of my biggest fears. I have many people in my life that I trust to keep me accountable to not going into an arrogant ownership, this is mine mindset. And that goes quite far in the thinking of how does one retire? My dad sent me an article. My dad, the accountant, sent me an article about planning for your retirement. And it's one of those things where one's got to be responsible, but one's also got to understand who provides and what do we own and what is ours and all of those kind of things. It's a very complicated thing, because the minute we go into a mentality of I need to start storing a nest egg, and I need to start looking after myself, and I need to start gathering, and I need to start planning for my retirement, we've gone from serving to self-serving. And yeah, when we talk about faith accounting and kingdom mentality, please, I want you to understand I'm not an irresponsible person. I really understand the need for futures and looking after money and all that. I really understand that. I just know that there's a drive that comes where money is not the most important thing. Money has absolutely no real value in the kingdom of God, because God's kingdom owns everything. So when we're sitting in a position of saying we're going without or we need more, we're not accessing the unlimited resources of God. Cool. I think a big one, the next slide, is this is not our story. This is not even Mark's story. This is God's story. And the only thing we do in our life is play a part in other people's stories. The minute our story becomes the most important, the minute we're the main character, the minute we're the story, we're losing focus. We are not the main characters in our own life. The only thing that we do from a kingdom perspective is we play a role in other people's lives. Their lives are the story. We're just characters within that story. And our role as a character within that story is to bring God and Jesus into their lives. And that all these stories intertwine with one another and create God's bigger story. I don't know what I've ever done to be able to sit in this position. I've had a blessed life for 18, 19 years in recovery, and trust me, I don't know why I'm lucky enough to be in that position. It's not because I'm super spiritual. It's not because I pray all day. I don't wake up at 4 and have 2-hour-long prayer sessions about where God's calling me. I don't read my Bible every day. I am certainly not a holy, presentable man. My behaviors would be frowned upon by many church people. My language often frowned upon. And I don't see myself as a super spiritual, holy person, yet I am fundamentally blessed in all areas of my life. And I've always wondered, what is it that I managed to do that got me into this position? Why me, God? Why me? I'm not the person most people think would be sitting in this position. I think it comes down to the next slide there, Johnny, is the principles in which I live by. And these are non-negotiable principles for me. These are things that, if I'm not living according to this, I'm going to be going back and dying in addiction. I think when we talk about recovery and addiction, we're very blessed as people that have addiction, because our life really depends on living according to certain principles. Like the minute we stop living to those principles, we go back to addiction and we die. So, we talk about honesty, and we don't have a choice but to be entirely honest all the time about everything. Like the minute we start thinking we don't have to be honest, then we start heading into trouble. And a lot of the ministries in addiction that have operated for a long time, we used to run off a premise. I'm going to talk a little bit about old systems as we go through this process. We used to run off a premise that our honesty could impact other people's walk. And there was a justification for why we can be dishonest. And that justification was to protect other people, which in my mind becomes really absurd. It really becomes a negating of biblical principles to tell the truth. And when you get to a place of living 100% and just being honest, life really takes on a totally different meaning. When you have no choice but to be honest, life takes on a different meaning. Integrity also being a very important principle for me. If I say I'm going to do something, I need to do it. It just is. It's a universal law in my life. If I'm going to do something, I must do it. I can't make excuses. I can't justify. I can't go in a different direction. If I'm committed, I'm committed. And that's a difficult one to live with other people, because to be honest, and this is not a judgmental thing, some people can commit to doing something and then they're quite happy to change their mind or something more important's come up, or I just don't feel like it or whatever, and a fine way to live, but for me that really irks me. Like I can't do that, and so that's one of my big principles. The next one is needing and wanting nothing. Difficult one to hold on to. But yeah, my marriage started in a garage. Well, living in a garage. In a garage that me and my wife had tiled and put in underfloor heating. When we got the St. Francis house, we really, I knew I had to do the work. Like I was driven. I haven't experienced that amount of drive ever. We painted, we sanded, we recarpeted, we did most of the work. It wasn't something that we hired in professionals and did all of these things. I can remember doing the carpets that came from my dad's old office and cutting and sticking and gluing and doing all those things with a group of people. And that commitment to doing the hard work is another valuable principle in understanding how we activate kingdom thinking. The hard work and the ability and the willingness to do the hard work is what gives us access into the kingdom. And that needing and wanting nothing, like just to be completely satisfied to live in a garage with underfloor heating that you'd put in yourself, is a mindset that really kind of keeps you grounded. You know, we moved from the halfway house to South Coast, and we moved into a pretty much a smaller place in a staff accommodation with all our dogs and cats and lizards and snakes and whatever. And that ability to just be able to look outside of your own kind of possession and just say, you know what I've got in my life is absolutely profound. To be having a job and doing the things that we do, we don't need anything more. Of course, there's the flesh that comes in at once, and that often distracts us and often puts us in a position of feeling dissatisfied. And there's been many moments in my life where I've wanted more and I've pushed for more. And the more I push for needing and wanting more, the more frustrated and resentful and unhappy I become. And it gets to a point where I've learned in that mindset of where I'm at in my life that sometimes I just need to cut it off and let it go. And one will be amazed when I do that in my life, let things go. Very shortly after that, things happen. And that principle of letting go of the control and giving it back to God and stepping back and being okay with where I'm at the moment is what activates the ability for God to continue to move. And me and God have a very good relationship. God laughs at me often because I get driven. I try and kick open doors, and I try and side skirt God's closed doors, and I try and do all these things in my mind, and God doesn't get angry with me. He laughs. He laughs quite a lot. I'm the brunt of his jokes many times, because my futile attempts of trying to get things done is just, it's hilarious, you know. We eventually got a house in South Coast, which is a whole nother wonderful story. I mean, that house we have in Ramsgate is a beautiful house, and it ticked many of the boxes of the things that I wanted to have. I'll go into a bit later. I lost everything at South Coast Recovery Centre, and was probably the most painful time I had. And when we started Johara, we moved back into a Wendy house. Without an ensuite bathroom, and definitely not with any underfloor heating. We took a serious downgrade, but it was never in our mind a downgrade. There was never anything in our minds that was like, this is just misery. Like, it's never been this, I need to progress to these next levels. Like, beautiful to be living in a Wendy house, to be peeing in the middle of the night in the bush because it's too much of a mission to open the house and go to the bathrooms, sharing your bathrooms and your showers with the residents, and just looking around and waking up to this mountain and to this new ministry and to these people and freedom. Like, there's so much in life that when you look at what you've got, you actually realize you don't need anything more. Like, you never ever need anything more than what you've already gotten. Any distraction in I need something else becomes just that, a distraction. And when we get to a ministry perspective of saying, I need something in order to do the ministry, we're procrastinating or becoming lazy or making excuses. Like, we have that promise that God has given us everything that we need. Cool, next slide. Faith accounting. Oh, my dad's going to hate me. So I'm surrounded, well, my dad's an accountant, very much a numbers guy, works off Sage, which I think is the biggest con in the whole entire planet. I still to this day do not understand Sage and how it works and whether income's real income or not real income or money in the bank. I just don't understand it. We've made this much profit. Okay, that's fantastic, but it's not in the bank. Yeah, but it's in here and it's this appreciation. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you're ever going to buy a business, don't look at the Sage books, because I can tell you that they're not a true reflection of reality. One of the things I know God's never going to do for me is make me wealthy. And I know my bank account's never going to be big, because a big bank account is going to equal move towards independence rather than dependence. That's not to say that nobody should have big bank accounts. I just know for me that that's not in my projections. That's not to say that I don't have a lot of things. Like, I got probably the most beautiful property in Campus Rus. I have a really, really cool little house. I have cars and food and whatever I need. I'm blessed. But my bank accounts are never going to be super, super full. So faith accounting is a concept that's painful for people that like budgets, projections, cash flow, savings, income, expenditure, and profit. Those words are not spiritual faith accounting words. Yes, those words are worldly accounting words. Because yeah. So this concept, I mean, I've kind of lived this concept quite a lot, but I've never been in the position of this kind of dependency on God. So we were struggling, in inverted commas. Yes, and we were doing cash flows with my dad and budgeting and what money's coming in versus what money needs to go out versus... It was intense, and it made me miserable. Like, it absolutely made me totally miserable, because you're constantly waiting for money to come in, you're constantly monitoring and managing your spending, you're constantly on this verge of, we're not going to have enough, so we can't go this direction, we can't go that direction. And yeah, I just got enough one day and I just said, I'm done with this, Dad, and we're going to do the faith accounting thing. Like, I don't need to know what's coming in because God will provide. And I don't need to know what's going out because we're spending it for the people. And literally he sat there, and as that happened, money came in, donations came in, washing machine came in, weed eater came in, new pool pump came in. Like, the minute we put that cash flow projection budgeting system down, God started to provide again. And God has provided in miraculous ways without even having to worry. And one of the principles is God provides for his house. So this is something we've got to understand. We are God's children. Like, I've never had to live in my mom and dad's house growing up, and I have to provide for my mom and dad. I've lived in my mom and dad's house, and I've never worried about electricity. Who's paying the rent? Who's paying the bills? I've never worried about those things. As a child in my mom and dad's house growing up, it's never been my responsibility to go and provide money for their house to run. And there's a thing in my mind that dawned on me in understanding this, is that we need to stop trying to provide for God's house. God will provide for his house. We can provide for God's people, but the minute we get distracted and worried that God is not going to look after his own ministry and that it's now our responsibility to take care of God's ministry, we're dividing our attention and our responsibility. We're wanting to build a dining hall at Johara, and I've been wanting to raise money, and I've done lots of raising of monies. It's never been for Johara, and it's never been for the actual ministry. When we raise money, it's for outreach and going to Mozambique and for people that need medical expenses, and that's easy. I can ask people for loads of things when it comes to helping other people. But when it becomes a self-serving thing, I start to get apprehensive. And doing this talk, I realized why I'm being apprehensive about it is because I'm actually trying to provide something that God should already be providing. It's not my responsibility to provide, because God will give us everything that we need. And so, yeah, I think, where's this one going on? I think the faith accounting pushes us to live in a life where we stop worrying and stressing. And I'm not to say that this human nature doesn't push us to worry and stress, but I know every month, when I get to the end of the month, there's going to be enough money to pay salaries and to pay everything. And it happens every month. Johara doesn't have large accounts. Savings and nest eggs, by the way, are not godly. It's what we find when we have savings and nest eggs, is that God makes us broke, so we have to use that saving and nest egg. It's we got to be mindful. The more we give, the more we receive. The more we stash away, the less we receive. Eventually, the stash away is going to be spent, and we're going to start all over again. And so Johara never runs off big bank balances. We're always running on the cuff of things. And we always get through. Always. Just yesterday was payday. I was 56,000 Rand short. And I woke up in the morning and I got a 56,000 Rand payment, which is not normal because our payments are normally 26,000 Rand a month. So I don't even know where that 56,000 Rand came from yesterday, but it came and it cleared the same morning as payday. And I could have been stressing, but I wasn't worried at all because every single month we somehow managed to get through. When you've got that activation, there's something quite exciting about life. But it upsets the accountants. I've got a good friend, David, who works with me. He hates this. If he was here today, he'd be flicking me in the background there. He would not be, he probably would have walked out. But the people have seen it happen time and time and time and time again. I'll get to some specific points shortly. Next slide. So one of the big verses that govern my life and that drive our teachings and that drives our understanding is that 2 Peter 1, it says, by his divine power, and this is important, not ours, it's by his divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. So we want everything we need, live a godly life. Not selfish, not self-serving, not one that we're constantly living in a position of needing and wanting. No. We have received all this by coming to know him. Again, a super important premise. Do we really know who God is and how he operates? The one who called us, again, our life needs to be in line with where God has called us to be in order to access that godly life and in order to have access to everything that we possibly need. To himself by means of his marvelous glory and excellence, not our own. And we're fortunate in Johara to be able to teach and help and heal people that come from really weird spiritual backgrounds. And they have a inclination to have self-esteem and self-doubt and self-worth problems. Their first attempt to getting closer to God is to develop worth and value within themselves by ticking boxes of extended prayer, extended Bible reading, extended this. If I behave in a manner that makes me more worthy to be loved by God, God will bless me. And that mentality has got to go. We cannot manipulate God into doing things for us because we behave in a certain manner. Like, we have to understand all of this is just because God chooses it to be. And that is something we preach a lot. Stop trying to earn God's love, you've already got it. Stop trying to earn God's forgiveness, you've already got it. Stop trying to earn God's favor, you've already got it. And we waste a lot of time in our lives trying to earn these things that we already have. And the biggest problem I have with that mentality is when we don't have, it means we're not worthy, which is not true. When we're not getting, it means we're not behaving in a certain manner, which is not true, because none of this is based on our own excellence. None of this is based on our own power. It's just based on God's excellence and God's power. Next slide. Because of his glory and excellence, he has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share his divine nature and escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. And again, we tie this nicely into faith accounting. We are sharing in God's divine nature because we trust in God's promises. And we understand God's promises and we walk within God's promises. This allows us to escape the world's corruption, which is caused by the human desires. I need and I want more. In a deeper measure, we escape the worldly thinking when we understand the promises made that we are not striving for our own self-ego, to look better, to do all of these things. And again, it's that flipping switch that says this isn't about me. It's because part of our ministry problems comes in when we start to turn the ministry into what it reflects about ourselves. And this then becomes, this is about me. What am I getting? What do I look like? How much power do I have? What's the ego going with it? And all those things. And that starts to get into that worldly thinking again. So, next slide. You can skip one or two. There we go. In view of all this, it says, make every effort to respond. And I said, here's our responsibility. In view of the understanding of God's promises and that he provides, we have to make every effort to respond to these promises. We supplement our faith with a generous provision of moral excellence with knowledge, knowledge with self-control, self-control with patient endurance with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. The more you grow like this, the more productive and useful you will be. These are things that we can score ourselves. When I've lost brotherly love, I need to go back and see what's going on. I've generally lost the patient endurance. Yes, I've generally lost the self-control. I've generally gone all the way back and lost the faith. And that brotherly love is, I put it just within this church, this is easy brotherly love. This is not loving outside of the church. For us, it's brotherly love is within the center of Johara. It's within my staffing team. If I've got agitations with the staffing team, I've lost that. What's happening? Where am I? And if that brotherly love is not going out into the communities and extending past our own little circle, we're not reaching that full goal. And that last sentence, the more that we grow in these things, the more productive we become, is very important. When we've lost productivity, we've stopped growing. Yes, those who fail to develop in this way are short-sighted or blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their old sins. And so it says, so dear brothers and sisters, work hard to prove that you are among those God has called and chosen. And I want to say this, hard work is the only gift we have to give to God. We can't gift God money because it's already His money. We can't just throw money at something and say, that's my contribution. It's not your money, it's God's money that you're giving back to God. That's not a contribution. Your contribution, the only thing that I have to give to God is my hard work. Because everything else He owns. Everything else He's given to me. And so, from a ministry mentality, we've got to be in that hard-working mindset. I've got a whole long thing here. Oh. You guys know all these things. Patience, endurance, the biggest one. We have to patiently endure the waiting for the provision. With faith that we understand that the provision is coming, and with choices and decisions and actions as if that provision has already been made. This is what upsets the faith the accountants. Yeah, this is what upsets the accountants. We spend the money before we got it. It's on the belief that the money's coming. It's not save the money and then spend. No, we make a decision, we're going this way. And we spend the money and we go that way. And that's not because we've allocated money for that project. No, it's just because there's money in the bank account, whether it's for food or anything else, it doesn't matter. We're going this way now. And the money comes later. Faith says we take action in the belief that God is already going to provide. And if God doesn't even want us to go down that road, that's fine, because we still believe that's where He's taking us. If He closes that door, that's not a waste of money. As God will provide that money in a different manner. Right, and then that godliness thing, which I looked at, was, I don't understand what that godliness is, but I looked at it from a Matthew 5 Beatitudes perspective, which is another really big Bible verse that we drive along. John, you can change the screen just now. So, but Matthew 5, you guys probably know it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Kingdom mentality, kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. These are inheriting the earth things. These are big promises. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And when we look at these things and we start to say, right, there's a couple of requirements in our mentality and our thinking that accesses the blessings. The first one is the poor in spirit, which is not making myself look more holy. It's not activating myself. It's not trying to pursue this tick box mentality that says this makes me a better Christian. No, I'm a crappy Christian. Yes, and I'm not a great spiritual warrior. I don't need to be. Yes, because the power is actually in God. I do, however, need to be mindful and in a good mentality to mourn for those shortcomings that I have. Yes, the acknowledgement and the understanding of my shortcomings is vitally important. Yes, that's what keeps me in a position of meek submission to God. And And then it comes into the righteousness, hungering and thirsting for doing what's right in God's sight. And the next one, which is so important, is being merciful. Sometimes we hunger and thirst for God's righteousness that we forget the need for mercy. The one thing that Jehoshaphat operates off of is no consequences. We come from a system before Jehoshaphat that I would have given my life to protect. I believed in that system with everything that I had, but that system became outdated. That system lacked what I like to call mercy and grace. That system had a set of parameters that you had to live by. If you did not live by those parameters, you were no longer worthy of acceptance and grace. And it damaged a lot of people. And so the Jehoshaphat system came in, taking away that consequence-driven thing and just brought in grace and mercy. And the amount of change that grace and mercy brings is a hell of a lot more than what consequence brings, specifically to the people that we work with. And so it's one thing for us to be driven to do what's right in God's sight, but it's another thing to do what's right and fight for what's right in God's sight while still operating in a place of mercy. We preach this, the pure-hearted people are the ones that see God. That's the promise. A lot of our guys want to see God, want to understand God, want to hear from God. And the access, according to this, is through a purer heart. And then the thing that nobody likes to talk about is the persecution. I don't think we hear that much from the Bible, from the pulpit. Come to Jesus and you'll be persecuted. Yes, the persecution is ultimately part and parcel of the package. And this makes me very, 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 very lucky because I get persecuted all the time. The role of our job in running addiction treatment is that we go from hero to villain within 5 minutes. And it's not based on us. Yes, it's generally based on the other person's behavior, and they don't like the response that they're getting, and so they've got to project blame. And we can go from the savior of a family and the very next day to the exact cause of all of their problems. And we can have that in the treatment center all day long. We are being persecuted in one way or another. And I want to say this, there's only one reason we can withstand that level of persecution. And that is, number one, is that we are constantly assessing ourselves in whether we're still aligned with where God wants us to go. We always do, specifically in Jehoshaphat, what we can to maintain the peace and to sustain the relationship. And this is an important concept for me and for Jehoshaphat, is that we don't break the relationships. It's the last thing that we ever want is a broken relationship. And so a lot of the people that we work with are still in good standings with us. And as long as we've done what we can to maintain that peace and not break that relationship, I believe that we're standing good. Yes, we always question what our hearts and our motives are. Is this a self-serving? Is this frustration? Is this where God wants us to go? Is this good? Have we been offended? What is driving our own things? The old system was built in power and control. Yes, that's where it worked. Now, I'm not saying 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the old system didn't work. But it was birthed in power and control. Those in authority had the power and the control to manage those below. And so if I'm living outside of that intention of power and control, I'm doing all right. If I've already extended grace and mercy more than I could possibly do, I'm doing all right. Going down, we always look at our own shortcomings. So I work really closely with David, who's been a godsend, really, who's joined us, and yeah, we're super critical on one another. Like it's not in a negative mentality, but there's a competition that's always happening for doing things better. And then there's a strong level of accountability that happens quietly that says, what have we done wrong? Where did we go? When we lose somebody out of Johara, it hurts like hell. Like, I don't like losing. I don't want to lose. And when I have to lose or give up, like, it really is a painful exercise. And it requires us to go back and say, where did we drop the ball? What did we do wrong? And what are we going to do to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And we have very differing views, which is cool because we get different inputs. But that level of accountability and saying, hey, where did we go wrong? Not tippy-toeing around it. If we've done something, we need to look at it and own it. Okay, skip for me 2 slides there, John, please. So, yeah. I went to South Coast Recovery Centre in 2011. We closed the halfway house. Well, we didn't close the halfway house, we handed it over, and it closed shortly thereafter, but we won't go down that direction. But I went into South Coast, and towards the end of my stay at South Coast, things got horrifically bad. Like, really, 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 really bad. For some reason, myself and a good friend of mine, Mark Dixon Seeger, were the reason for why things were going bad, and that somehow we had changed in our approach to life, which I need to tell you is quite a difficult thing to go through, because the very people that are telling you you're in the wrong are the very people that have kept you accountable for so long. And it rocked me badly, because it shifted, it questioned, and it cracked my faith. Up until that point, like, I had a good assessment of myself. My intentions and motives were always good. I was more than happy to be accountable and called out. Things were going in a really good direction, and all of a sudden things took a solid right. And it did a lot of damage. It was about an 18-month time where we were in this thing of just trying to understand, where were we wrong? Where was Mark Lewis wrong? Where was Laura wrong? Like, everybody said we had shifted. Everybody said our attitudes had changed, and I take that stuff serious. I don't question that, and it really hurt, and it took everything. It somehow everything in my life was deconstructed. All of my friends, my support structures, the ministries, the work was all just slowly but surely just removed. To a point that we weren't allowed to do spiritual teachings, we weren't allowed to do group therapy, we weren't allowed to do any of those things, and it broke me. It broke me to a point of, like, almost, it pushed me to suicide. Like, it was a moment that I almost drove myself and my wife into oncoming traffic, because everything that I believed in that had got me to that point was suddenly now no longer valid. And I didn't know where I stood with that, and I didn't know who to look to for answers. And yeah, eventually, thank goodness, my mom and dad offered us a way out, which was probably one of the best moments of my recovery time, because I was committed to God in staying at South Coast. I was desperately wanting to do the work that I was called to do. I was really, really, despite all the nonsense around me, I was really trying. And it was getting nowhere. And so we eventually left. Thank goodness for that. Mom and dad offered us a way out. And the only 2 people on this planet that could tell me to do something that was against my commitment is mom and dad. So I took it. And Shane, they moved us into their house with our dogs and our cats and our 3-legged chameleons. And yeah, you can see it again. Like, you've gone from your own house and furniture and job and marriage to no house, no furniture, no job, living back home with mom and dad. Like, I can tolerate that shift if I've done something wrong. But if I haven't done anything wrong that I can see, the loss of everything, it is quite a difficult pill to swallow. But it is that very experience and that very lesson of pain and loss that shifted my entire reality of what God wanted us to do from a treatment perspective. And it's equipped me to a whole nother level of being able to see what's wrong with the old system and never to go back to that thing. And so for a long time I prayed with God to never ever ever take me through something like that again. And it lived in my heart with a lot of resentment and a lot of fear and a lot of worry. It really, really did a lot of damage. I went through an entire process to get rid of that damage, which I'll read at the end. But I've come to a point in my life that I've understood if God needs to take everything away from me again, it just means that He wants to give me something better. Because what we have at Johara and what we have now is 100 times better than what we had at South Coast Recovery Center. And we were aligned to take over South Coast Recovery Center. That was the entire goal. And I've come to realize within myself, which has given me a great amount of peace, is not to fear the loss. Because the loss brings the next chapter. And the next chapter is always going to be better. And so if we're constantly living in a fear-based thing of I'm going to lose everything and I don't want to go through that pain, we forget that the pain is bringing the better. The pain is bringing the joy. So when we started Johara, there was a business concept presented to me, proof of concept. Yes, I need to prove that this business concept could work. I want to say that that's not necessarily a business concept, that is a faith accounting concept. Yes. Start and God will provide. Not wait. What am I doing wrong? 5 more minutes. 45 more minutes. 45 more minutes, no problems. Start and God will provide. When we started Johara, we started on a promise of income that never came. Yet God provided more income later. If we had to wait for the income before we started, we would never have started. If we had have given up because the initial income that was coming was no longer coming, we had said, well, now we're in big trouble, we would never have been where we are today. And God rained blessings down when we started. God rained provision down when we started. It was the most stress-free thing I've ever done in my life, is to build Johara. It just rained blessing. It rained staff. It rained provisions. It rained vehicles. It rained money. It rained inductions. It was the most stress-free thing I have ever done in my life, was to be able to build an entire treatment center while God just rained down provisions. I mean, we lost all our furniture. We bought an entire house of furniture for about 8,000 rand eventually. God just replenished and upgraded our house's furniture for very little money. And those things that just come. And it came because we took a step and we went forward. And number 2, we did the difficult work. Now, Jesus feeds 5,000 people. I've only got 45 minutes left, so I can't read the whole thing. It is a great understanding. Go to the next slide. The disciples go to Jesus and said, look, Lord, we need to send these people home because it's getting late and they need to eat. Now I want to make this highlight because that sounds like a wonderfully nice, well-intended thing to say. This is coming from the disciples. How caring of them. Yes. Hey Lord, let's finish now because these people need to go home and eat. Yes. It's a mentality that many of us actually have. Yes. We wanting to put the needs of others first. Yes, but we're still pushing them to provide for their own needs. And Jesus says, no, listen, we need to feed these people. And they're like, well, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Many of us want to go and buy more fish to feed the people. We want to say, well, here's my credit card, run along to the shop and go and get more. Yes? Like, our job is done. Yes? My ministry work complete. Yes? Oh, you need more bread? I'll quickly run to the bakery and buy it for you. Yes? And then drop the bread off and carry on with your life. Yes? Jesus says, no. Yes? We're going to feed them with the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. Yes? Bring what you have and let's get to work. And when I was putting this thing together, I thought to myself, you know how much work it must have been to feed 5,000 people? Like, that's no joke. To have 5,000 people sitting down, and I've got to take these baskets of bread and fish to the 5,000 people, must have been bloody exhausting. Yes? And the disciples, what they did, they took everything that they had, the little that they had, everything. They didn't first snack on bread and say, well, before we get to feeding these people, we better have a loaf of bread or a sandwich. No. They took everything they had, they gave it to Jesus, and then they did the work of feeding 5,000 people. Yes, and what happened after that is that they had the 12 baskets left over. Yes, the provision of the 12 baskets and the excess came because they were prepared to put everything on the line and do the hard work. And it's a concept that drives me a lot. Yes, we have to be the ones doing the hard work. It's the only offering we have. It's the only offering we have is these 2 hands and our time and our energy to do the work. Cool. We can go to the next slide because now I've only got 43 minutes left. We can go to you can go to the next one after that. We have to give to receive. Luke 6, I think it's coming up, but I might not be able to read it, but you all have Bibles, so you can read it yourselves. So it's coming up. Luke 6, we have to give to receive. You want faith accounting to work for you? You have to give. When the numbers are low, I sponsor people. It upsets the accountants. There's too many sponsored beds at Johara. And so we're giving away too much in medical and tuck shop expenses. This is getting out of hand. We're leaking money. No. Yes, when the resident numbers are low, the income's low, you would think you would stop giving. But the only way to get new residents in is to give beds away. And so the sponsoring of beds in Johara is really the ability to ensure that we get more income in. We have to work off that premise that we have to give before we can receive. Now we fall into a bitter trap in ministry when we have the belief that we need before we can give. And the trap is we wait for the need to be met before we give, but the problem is until we give, we don't get. And so things get worse and 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 worse. And if we go back to the 5,000, if we give away everything, that thing's coming back big time. And so when you guys are in need of something and you don't have, give away. Even if it's the last little bit. Yes, even if it seems as though it's the most absurd thing to do, give it away. I also know when we're not doing well, that I have to shift my responsibilities back, my focus back to my day-to-day responsibilities. All right, now this is the other big kingdom thinking thing, is we've already been given responsibilities by God. And if we don't take care of those responsibilities, He's not giving us more. And if we are looking in our lives and saying, what more can we do, Lord? Where do you want us to go? And what are you taking us? And what's the next venture? And we are ignoring the things that we have to take care of today, we're never going to progress or receive. And so I have to maintain a mentality of look after the responsibilities I have today. Do not get distracted by the things that I want for tomorrow. And then look at the staff and look at the community and look at all of those things. 5 minutes, 45 minutes. Okay, next slide, or skip that one, next one. Go again. There we go. What do we invest in? We always invest in people, not us. Always invest in people, not us. Our money always goes to somebody else, not ourselves. Whether it's training in Zimbabwe, whether it is playing in fundraising soccer tournaments, whether it is going on a tour of South Africa to talk to the treatment centers, whether it is the Halo organizations and things that we did, all of it is about other people. And all of these projects that we go about doing, it's fed by Jahara into other people's lives. And I do believe that mentality of taking the resources that we already have and making sure that it's going out into other people's lives is fundamentally important, above and beyond just taking care of ourselves. Because we've gone down the roads of different projects. Some have worked, some haven't. And one often thinks, was that a waste of time and income? And so we did a lot of work over in Zimbabwe, and we're going to open a rehab in Zimbabwe, and it was flights, and it was training, it was all of this, and then all of a sudden we got to the point of saying, you know what, that this has come to an end. And then you question yourself, was I supposed to go there in the first place? Did I misread the whole situation? And the answer is no. The answer is whatever we went and did there, invested into other people that are going to change their lives, and they're going to go and do things. It's not about us and our story. Yes, our story may have just had an impact on those people and changed the direction of where they're supposed to be going. So, can I say that's a wasted investment? Absolutely not. Because that money that we invested into that project changed other people's lives. And whatever God does with that story has nothing to do with me. But it hasn't broke me, and it hasn't bankrupted me, and it hasn't been wasteful expenditure. Another wonderful word of the accountants, wasteful expenditure. Wasteful expenditure. You can't waste your money if you're spending it on other people. You can't waste God's money. Let's get that right. We cannot waste God's money if we're spending it on other people. There cannot be a definition of wasteful expenditure when the money that you have, which is God's money anyways, we don't own any of our own money. We don't earn any of our own money. God provides all the money that we need. We cannot define money spent on other people and on other ministries as wasteful expenditure. I don't believe that to be a biblical kingdom thinking, faith accounting principle. Hell yes, we can waste money on things we don't need. Hell yes, we can waste money on things that enrich us. Hell yes, we can waste money about making sure that our Jahara and our this and our that is well looked after and beautiful and whatever, but we can never write off money spent on other people in God's kingdom and going out into God's kingdom and helping as wasteful expenditure. And we can always believe that if we are spending money on God's kingdom and the expansion and outside of ourselves, that God will continue to provide and push back more and more money. So Luke 6, you can go to the next slide. Luke 6 says, give and you will receive. It says, your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount that you give will determine the amount that you get back. And so, you guys can go and read Luke 6. The whole of Luke 6 is fantastic with this whole thing that we're talking about today. The next slide. Yeah. Okay, so kingdom thinking is to know that our only goal is to expand the kingdom of God and to trust in the infinite resources that God can provide. It's God's responsibility is to take care of his house. Our responsibility is to take care of the people. When we are trying to take care of God's house, we're not taking care of the people anymore. And I think we need to know from Johara perspective and even from St. Francis perspective, taking care of the people does not mean the parish. Taking care of the people is not taking care of my Joharism. That's part of the ministry, but that ministry has to overflow into taking care of the wider community. It's the kingdom we're looking at. It's not God's house. God will take care of his house. It's not my responsibility as a child to go and pay for my dad's water and light. And my dad would never expect that of me. It's not my responsibility as a child to go and cover a mortgage and put groceries in the fridge. My dad would never expect that of me. Yet sometimes we can be living in God's house under the impression that our responsibility is to provide for God's house. And I need to say this from a kingdom perspective. What does that say about God when we're so worried about providing for his house? Like, what are we actually putting out there in terms of our belief and trust in God when we think that we have to do his job? Okay, you can skip to the last slide. We can go back a slide, actually. Go back a slide, sorry. So before we carry on with your prayer sessions and whatever else is going on as a church, number one, I would strongly suggest, as I started the sermon and as I think, what is the mission? What is the mission? What are we supposed to be achieving? Where are we going? Yes. Number two, what is my role within that mission? That's number three, like, who's the leader and the visionary of this mission? And this is something that I struggle to often. Well, I don't struggle, but this is a concept for me. I'm obviously the leader of Johara, which means it's my role to keep the vision and the mission going. And it's difficult for me to distinguish between the role of a leader and the role of a manager. I was reading some things like, is this church being managed or led? Is Johara being managed or led? And Johara's purpose is to make things better, obviously, all the time. This year we have done so much. Like, it's been a hard year, and we have done so much to improve on the things that we're already doing. We've done so much to go out and do supporter series and come to do conferences here and just get out and do things to make things better. And that is a constant driving force of my role, is to say, well, don't get complacent, let's move, what's the next step? And to look at these systems and to say, hey, this is not a good system, this needs to change, this needs to move. And I can't do that without a good management team executing what needs to be happening. But Johara can never be managed, it has to be led. And I think that applies to the church. The minute we start managing an organization instead of leading it, we got a problem. So yeah, we can skip to the next slide. I want to say this. When I started Johara, we had nothing. I lost Heal. I lost the support of Heal. I lost all my connections with the South Coast Recovery staff team. It was a lonely venture. Yes, it was a lonely venture. It was me and Laura and Mom and Dad against the world. And that was a horrible thing. I'd been 11 years clean by that stage. I had built a proper support structure. I mean, we had done a lot. So by the time I got to opening Johara, living in my Wendy house with nothing, it was a grind to go and build all these things up again. And super exciting to have new opportunities, and yeah, it's become better. But when I got to a point where I had to let go of some of the bitterness, it took a long time to let go of some of the bitterness that was resulted in that situation. And we did a solid 6-week prayer session at which interval God gave me Bible verses all the time, and it amalgamated in 2 Corinthians 6, which has become my driving Bible verse. It really, this verse tidied up that 6-week thing and said, life's going to be okay. At which point I put the fear down of losing everything again and said, you know what, even if I lose everything, I'm still going to have more. And it goes like this. It says, as God's partners, we beg you not to accept this marvelous gift of God's kindness and then ignore it. For God says, at just the right time I heard you. On the day of salvation I helped you. Indeed, the right time is now. Today is the day of salvation. It goes on to say, we live in such a way that no one will stumble because of us, and no one will find fault with our ministry. In everything we do, we show that we are true ministers of God. We patiently endure troubles and hardships and calamities of every kind. We have been beaten, been put in prison, faced angry mobs, worked to exhaustion, endured sleepless nights, and gone without food. We prove ourselves by our purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, by the Holy Spirit within us, and by our sincere love. We faithfully preach the truth. God's power is working in us. We use the weapons of righteousness in the right hand for attack and the left hand for defense. We serve God whether people honor us or despise us, whether they slander us or praise us. We are honest, but they call us impostors. We are ignored even though we are well known. We live close to death, but we are still alive. We have been beaten, but we have not been killed. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. And it says we own nothing, and yet we have everything. And that mentality of having everything needs to live within our day-to-day existence. We really, really don't need to own anything to have everything, because we are God's children and God owns everything. And we need to rely on God to provide for our needs while we go out and do the hard work for God's people. Cool.